Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Hope you enjoyed your lunch on this beautiful day outside. Just a few announcements to make before we introduce our speaker for this afternoon. From 4:30 to 6:30, there is the poster session, and the art of expression exhibit will also be featured there. And there's a reception including a cash bar in the Dean's Hall. So please make sure you go and check out the art and the posters. Also, if you need your CEUs, you can get those before this poster session. You don't have to wait until afterwards, so you can sign out before that. We have with us today Dr. Barbara Esch, who is a behavior analyst and a speech pathologist with over 30 years of experience in behavioral interventions for individuals with developmental disabilities. She has worked in school, home, clinic, and hospital settings, and her workshops, training, symposia, and research have been presented in the US, Europe, and Australia, and focus on the use of behavioral procedures to improve speech, language, and feeding skills for individuals of all ages with a wide range of medical and educational diagnoses. Dr. Esch received her PhD in applied behavior analysis from Western Michigan University and her MA in speech pathology from Michigan State University. She is the author of the Early Echoic Skills Assessment, part of the Verbal Behavior Milestones Assessment and Placement Program, also known as the VB-MAP. She is the founder and past chairperson of the Speech Pathology Special Interest Group of the Association for Behavior Analysts International. Her research on behavioral treatments for early speech acquisition appears in the Analysis of Verbal Behavior and the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. Dr. Esch is co-owner of Esch Behavioral Consultants Incorporated, a consulting company specializing in behavioral treatments for individuals with severe communication delays. I know I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. This is also being webcasted, so when you do have questions, we'll be repeating those questions so that our audience that are listening live can also benefit from those answers to the questions that you will be giving to her. So let's welcome Dr. Barbara Esch.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see so many folks here that are interested in this topic that I think gives all of us fits and starts sometimes, trying to figure out how do we address the needs of those kids, whether they be children or adults that we're working with who are not yet speaking fluently. The workshop or the talk today is not a skill building talk. Unfortunately, those are always fun to do. But I do like to kind of remind you what you probably will know at the end of this 3 hours that we spend together and what we're not going to be covering. It's kind of an information base, I think. It's primarily trying to answer the question, what do I do if I have a child coming to me that's making few sounds, maybe a few. They're not always correct. They're not really talking. They're not babbling. I just really don't know where to go in terms of what to select, how to get a speech training program started. And I know that as behavior analysts and speech pathologists, we're kind of all in this together, dealing with folks that we're concerned with their communication and moving their specifically their vocal mands, their vocal tags, vocal interverbals, and so on, moving those ahead. I'm going to be talking today and presenting primarily the premise that this all rests on the echoic. And so I have a fair amount of redundancy built into the talk, so I understand from other folks that hear this that don't have a speech pathology background that, wow, you know, this is tough information. This is I always say teaching is not for sissies, and I think that teaching speech is for sure not for sissies. There's some basic information that you need, and I know it's hard. I know there's new terminology and so on, and I know that those of you who are not speech pathologists don't have a background in this, and so it may be a bit difficult. That's why I've built in so much redundancy into the talk. So if you miss a little bit, or you feel like I'm not quite sure I understand what she's talking about or what to do about this or that, I think if you hang in there, you'll probably hear it again in somewhat different words. So before I get started, how many speech pathologists do we have here today? So about half of us, and of the speech pathologists, how many have a credential in board certified behavior analyst or BCABA? Good, okay, so a goodly number. I think that times have changed. In the past, it wasn't always the case that we could all sit in the same room, be on the same topic, and be able to share the information that we have from both perspectives, both scientific fields. But I will say this, there is not another group of people better at analyzing small differences, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, small vocal differences, than behavior analysts. Nobody does it better than we do as behavior analysts, and nobody does it better than we do as speech pathologists. We know how to analyze, how to look at small little pieces. And those of you in the audience that are parents, maybe occupational therapists, program directors, and folks who have some behavioral interest and some speech pathology interest, but maybe no formal training in either of those fields, I commend you for being here, and I promise you, you will understand most of I think, what I'm going to be talking about. Although we're listed at an intermediate level, the goal really is, you know, my teacher in college was Jack Michael, and he said, the student needs to learn to talk like the teacher talks. You have to make it so that they can talk like you talk, and then you've been successful. And I think maybe he got a little bit of flack from administration sometimes. Why are you giving all these A's out to your students? Well, he gave all those A's out to his students because we learned to talk like he talks. So that's my goal today, that this will not be beyond any ability to understand. So what is speech? Let's jump right into it. And we're going to look at it at a very, very basic level. Speech is muscle movement. And if I see one error that people make in dealing with folks that can't talk, they sort of don't look at this as a mechanism, a physical mechanism of musculature and bones and nerves and all of those things that has to work together in concert to produce a fluent, articulate response. And I recently learned that when I broke my wrist last week, and I've discovered that this side, my left hand, doesn't have that reinforcement history. It does not have the amount of practice. The movements that I make with this hand are not fluent, and they're not articulate, and they're sloppy and clumsy. And so when you have someone that has not worked their muscular system and received the automatic reinforcement available by fluent movements, you're going to have somebody that doesn't have ready access to giving echoic responses, giving vocal mand responses, giving vocalizations of any kind. So that's our basic goal, and that's why I think it's so important for folks to understand that we're talking about a physiologic, physical, mechanical system here that we need to know as teachers. Where do we start? So with the muscle movement, here's how speech is, we think. I'm pretty sure this is how it's produced. We move the muscles and it makes a sound. And when we make a sound, we observe that sound if we have an intact auditory system and we can hear what we're saying. For some reason, it sounds right to us. Sometimes it doesn't sound right, but when it does sound right, the reinforcing value of those speech sounds increases, making it more likely that the sounds that we make that do have that reinforcing value will be selected into the repertoire. So let's kind of take a look. Many of you have heard about the procedure called stimulus-stimulus pairing. We're pretty sure that this is how typically developing children acquire their initial babbling and vocal play. We have an SR here for reinforcers that is good stuff, high value stimuli that we give to babies. We give them warmth, we give them food, we give them dryness, we give them touch, we give them movement with rocking. We give lots and lots of things that they like. And at the time that we're doing that, we make sounds in our native language. For example, we might say ma, ma, ma. And we do that a lot. We have a lot of different pairings of making sounds while we're giving care to the child. Well, on a separate practice time, or in a separate practice time, children randomly make noises. We know that. They come out with all kinds of sounds. How do they learn to speak the way we speak in whatever language we're speaking? Well, what happens is they randomly will make all of the sounds that they can, and sometimes they are going to randomly make the same sound that has been paired with the delivery of high value things, that is reinforcers. And that particular sound, when they hear it, it will sound better. It will sound right. It will get selected into the repertoire because of this previous pairing history that we have up here at the top. When that happens, when that gets selected into the repertoire, it can be automatically reinforced. That is, it sounds good when I say that, so I'm going to say it a whole lot more. And we see that happening all the time. This is just a very brief video of a little guy that I'm doing a pairing procedure with. It's very simple. You make some sounds and then you deliver some fun. And you know, you recognize that if you're a parent, that you do that lots and lots with your child or with any child that you're providing care for. So in a speech training program, let me just kind of give you an overview of what we're looking at. With the children that we see, this first piece is usually missing. That is, there isn't a preference for people. There isn't a preference for things. And so we get the children that we're working with that are having difficulty learning to talk, disregarding the people in their environment. If they're disregarding those people, they're not going to benefit from the sounds that those people are making. That is, other stimuli are competing for their attention. So we want to make sure that we establish preference for people, preference for toys, preference for items, that is things, so that those become conditioned reinforcers for the child. That increases the likelihood that that child is going to be able to learn from us by paying attention to what we're saying and doing. And I would say that of all of the skills that are missing from the teacher's toolbox, when I first see people teaching, trying to work with a child that they want this child to learn to speak, the part that's missing is that the child doesn't care whether they're with this person or not. They have not set themselves up to be a strong reinforcer. And I'm not just talking about delivering primary reinforcers like food. I'm talking about when that child comes to you, that has to be a bettering condition, not a worsening condition. It has to be, this is the best thing in the world, hanging out with this person. As soon as we impose some criteria for performance on that child, it makes it more difficult for him or for her. So we keep the bar very, very, very low. There are no criteria for performance for making sounds. One of the most difficult things for a beginning learner who's making sounds is for you to say it again, try it again. Almost, not quite, try it again. So initially, we accept everything that we're getting until we have a lot of raw material to work with. We increase vocalizations. We want lots and lots and lots of sounds with lots of variability, loudness differences, and frequency differences, different pitches, and so on. This is what we're going to be talking about today, the things more on the left side of the screen than in training the verbal skills, although then we're going to be moving into training mands and training echoics. The echoic is really the kingpin for everything that we want to do. If a child is developing typically, then the echoic is sort of going to develop along with the mand and the tact and listener responding and so on. But if a child isn't developing typically, we all learn that we should start with mand training. Well, how are you going to teach vocal mands if it's not through the echoic? How will the child know what to say for that mand if they can't benefit from the model that you present them? So for early speech learners who are behind, who have not been picking up speech typically at that typical developmental rate, then we really need to take a strong look at the echoic and figure out how can we make the echoic part of the mand training, but a separate component as well. You'll see lots, I'm going to skip through this other part here, and we'll focus our talk mostly in that area. So a typical child makes lots of sounds, and they're imperfect. They talk baby talk. Somehow we figure it out. But what we have is a lot of raw material to deal with. We have a lot of different kinds of sounds, and because we have so many sounds that are so varied, it's easy to shape. If they only say one sound, ba, 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 and so on, then, and you want to shape, how do you shape? The way you shape is you wait for them to spontaneously or randomly emit some variation, and you immediately reinforce that. If there is no variation, your shaping program is going to really be challenged. So we want lots and lots of different sounds. We're more likely to get that if we don't communicate to the child that something coming out of his mouth is less than stellar. We're talking about beginning learners here. And once we get some fluency with making sounds, that is then going to morph over into very rapid speech. We'll look at the system that requires. But we primarily want to start by reinforcing the echoic within the mand context and then lead it on out to our other verbal operants. Well, this is a video of a little guy that's 18 months old, and you can see here the benefit of echoic training. He now has some tacts, he has some interverbals, and he has some listener responding as well.
Kaden, can you say mama? Can you say dada? Good job. Can you say fish? Can you say cracker? Cracker. Can you say ball? How about car? Can you say car? Car. Can you say bye-bye? How about... Good job. What does a duck say? Quack. How about a dog? Woof. What does a dinosaur do? What does a crab do? Pinch, pinch, pinch. Can you cough? Can you smile? Good job. Can you laugh? Laugh. Can you laugh? Do you love mama? Kaden, do you love mom? You do. Can you say bye-bye to the camera? Say bye-bye. Use your words. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Okay, so lots and lots of skills. He's 18 months old, baby talk, but he's been exercising this musculature for 18 months, and this is all the better it is. And nobody thinks that's strange. He sounds like he's supposed to sound at 18 months. Well, let's take a look at what those skills are. How many people are familiar with VB MAP? Okay, so I'm not really going to spend time talking about it other than to focus your attention on level 1 and level 2. We don't test the echoic beyond level 2 because typically developing children pretty much have that operant in place by that time. And so it isn't necessary to look at it from 30 months to 48 months. But within those first 30 months, we're looking at specific skills. And the first 18 months are what we call vocal practice. And then once there's a lot of fluency in making sounds and we're getting something, actually this little guy is pretty advanced in his skills. Then from 18 months to 30 months is more what we would call baby talk. But it's still imperfect. And we'll play this short little video of a guy who's 33 months old, almost 3 years old. I'm not sure about everything he's saying in this video. I can understand some of it. You'll see he's got some interverbals in place. He's answering some questions and so on. But what I'd like you to listen for is the inaccuracy of his speech. And this is after 33 months of practice. And we would say this kid sounds normal.
Where's Kitty's house?
Here.
Are you going to go in Kitty's house?
Yeah. Kitty, you okay? You okay? You okay? You okay? You okay? You must be here. You okay?
Hey, you okay, Kitty? So we've got some grammatical differences. We've got a bunch of jargon in the middle of that I have no idea what he said. You go, you house, not your house. So all kinds of things that have been left off. But it's a very fluent speech, very fluent system. Well, this is the system that we're talking about. This is what we're asking these little guys that we're working with to move every single one of these structures in some kind of a coordinated dance so that we can understand what they're saying. The lips are here with the yellow and the green. The tongue is outlined in red. The vocal cords are at this level down here. This is the trachea, the airway. This is the esophagus that goes to the stomach. This is the back of the throat here. And this is the soft palate, kind of looks like Florida here, and the hard palate, the teeth. And the soft palate in English, that part of your body has to stay open to let air through the nasal cavity here for 3 sounds, for the and the N sound, N, and the NG sound, ing. Otherwise, it has to close off. And so this part of your body is always moving up against the back of the pharynx or the throat so that you don't sound nasal when you're talking. In addition, the tongue has to move in a bunch of different configurations to make different vowel sounds. And we'll take a look at some of those vowel sounds right now. Again, we have the tongue here, the soft palate here. Notice that the mandible will be moving, the jaw will be moving a little bit, not much. But take a look at what some of the vowel positions look like with the tongue. Okay, and this is what that system looks like when it's all moving together in concert. And again, I draw your attention primarily to what the tongue is doing right here, and how the vocal cords are closing and opening here, and the velum is moving up and down. The lips, of course, will also be moving, the jaw moving just a little bit.
When it comes to singing, I love to sing French art songs. It's probably my favorite type of song to sing. I'm a big fan of Debussy. I also love operas. I love singing Donizetti and Mozart and Strauss. But when I listen to music, I tend to listen to hard rock or classic rock music. And one of my favorite bands is AC/DC. And my favorite song is probably Back in Black, which I'll listen to over and over again in my room.
So it's a fast system, and if we practice with the kids that we're working with, say I, good job, say want, good job, say cookie, good job, we're never going to get this kind of fluent speech where we're getting 3 syllables per second often. We're getting 12, 15 syllables per breath. We're not going to get that kind of fluent talking, even for short phrases, even for 3 and 4 syllable phrases like I want tacos. We have to be able to coordinate this system and know what we're doing. So up until the end of level 2, these are the skills from bottom to top that the child has to develop. We need vowels. That's the first thing we work on, are vowels. If we don't have vowels, there's no sense working on consonants, because the vowels are kind of the foundation for everything. We want those vowels to be produced at different pitches, different durations, short, long duration, and lots of different vowels. And then we want those vowels to be put into syllables with consonants surrounding them at the beginning and in the middle and at the end and so on. We don't want them just to say ba, ba, ba. We want repeated syllables, yeah. But then we need varied syllables as well, like ba-bee, baby. We don't want the child to say mama all the time. Eventually we want them to say mommy, and da-da moves into daddy. That's a much harder transition for a child that is not yet very skilled or fluent. And then we put all that together in connected strings that we then call jargon or baby talk. And then it moves into what we call true words and actual phrasing that looks like speech to us. So I'm going to take you through about the first 12 months or so. I think every 3 months we're looking at with these examples. And what I want you to listen to with this first video is at 3 months we have mostly vowels. Maybe the beginning of a little bit of a g-g sound or a k-k, a k sound, but mostly vowels. And the voice is weak. It is not a strong voice. This particular baby is 3 months old, and you'll see that tongue not kind of moving in a very coordinated fashion. The lips aren't really sure what to do. The jaw is not really moving in a coordinated fashion at all. But we're not surprised. This is 3 months worth, 90 days after birth, of this child babbling and making sounds throughout the day and maybe throughout the night as well. Hopefully not. So you'll hear kind of the weakness of the signal, and this is 90 days of practice in.
There.
So very weak. So at 6 months, we're hearing a much stronger speech signal. There's been a lot more practice, and the child can now control the pitch better, the loudness, and the duration. So I would encourage you, I get a lot of kids referred that somebody says, well, they've only been talking 6 months, and we want them to ask for pizza. Or we want them to say, I want a cookie, please. Or we don't know exactly what we should ask them to say, but for sure it probably should be sentences because they're 5, or they're 12, or they're 19. And so you want to keep in mind that it doesn't matter what the chronological age is when you're setting your speech targets. It matters how long have they been vocalizing and what are you getting in terms of vocalizations. So here's 6 months.
Hey, what you got to say? What you got to say, huh, Lou? Quack, 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 quack. And then what happened? And then what happened? Quack, 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 quack. It's quack, 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 quack.
They're just too cute. So here's another 6-month-old. We're beginning to see some more, as we did with this little guy, what we call reduplicated syllables. I can make the vowel and I can throw a consonant in there. Don't ask me to change the consonant and the vowel all at the same time. So we're getting ba, 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 ga, 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 primarily.
You're so sweet. Only 6 months old. Thank you. Blah, blah, blah.
Okay, so what you should also notice is how the mandible is moving, not in a way that you and I would move our jaw when we're talking. It can't move very far. It does need to move to accommodate tongue movement, but this jaw is moving way too much. Ba, 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 ba. As soon as we see that happening, we know the tongue is being pulled out of position to allow fluent speech to occur. And so this kind of practicing, if you see it with your kids, it's actually kind of a good thing. They need to be able to accommodate that tongue moving. But if you see that mandible moving like that, we see many children doing that with the L sound, la, ya, 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 instead of la, 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 la. They can't hold the mandible still and move just the tongue. So the mandible is actually kind of facilitating or helping out that tongue in moving because the tongue isn't very sophisticated yet. That is, there's not a very strong automatic reinforcement history for the various positions of the tongue. I think we'll skip this one. We can evaluate these vowels. This is a little guy who's he lives in a bilingual family, and so Mommy is here talking with him about the kitty that is between the two chairs, and we would still be able to evaluate vowel acquisition and consonant acquisition regardless of what the language is. So this is 10 months, and we're hearing loudness changes, pitch changes, and so on and so forth. Now we have a year, and we've got things that not only sound like they're beginning to be words, even though some of it is pretty garbled, but what we have that we don't have with many of our early learners with a diagnosis of autism or developmental disabilities, regardless of their age, but early speech learners, what we don't have is this fluency that you'll see in this next video. Fluency where I'm not really sure what this kid is saying, but I know that she's having a conversation. Because it's the breath breaks are at the right point. The breath support is supporting many syllables on one breath, and that's what we want. And the tongue is moving fluently. Okay. So why does all of this matter? Where would we look to be able to apply these kinds of skills? Well, often at this age of 12 to 18 months of practice, what we do with kids is we have them talk to us about things that they're interested in. That's the purpose of, I guess that's what we all do. We talk to each other about things that we're all interested in. And this is just an example of something that you can do and should do, I think, in the clinical setting. You can build echoic drills into these kinds of things that kind of look like fun. And the benefit of all of this speech practice, we're getting text, listener responding with joint control. Let me say a word about joint control. For those of you that may not be familiar with the term, it's a behavioral term. And in this instance, we're talking about the ability to tact, that is, label something, and to emit a listener response. Now, joint control is really required in remembering things. So if you tell a child, go say night-night to daddy, or go get a spoon from the kitchen and come back, how are they going to remember to do that? What is the skill that's involved if there's no echoic? Well, if they're signing, they're going to sign to themselves fork, fork, or spoon, 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 spoon as they walk. And at the moment that they see the spoon, they tact it, and they can emit the listener response. The echoic and the tact work together. I hear myself saying it echoically, and I hear myself tacting it. I see that item. And together, the echoic and the tact they jointly control that listener response so that you can actually pick up the spoon and walk back to where you're supposed to go. So without the echoic, it's hard to know how you would remember things vocally. That is, unless you're using sign language. Now, we remember things by writing them down, and if the delay is too long, but if we need to remember things for just a little short period of time, we usually repeat them to ourselves. I need to do this. I need to remember to get that. So the echoic has great, great value. So we've got the echoic training the tact, birdie, fishy. So we'll skip over this. So the children that I see pretty much fall into one of three categories, and they probably do for you as well. There's the group that has no real speech. They don't have very many vocals, and they don't have an echoic. And then we see the group that has some weak speech, but it's not under verbal control. That is, they can babble and make some sounds, but when you ask them to say what you say, they're not very good at doing that. And they may not have any vocal mands or vocal tacts. And then there's the group that can talk. They have speech under verbal control. Vocally, they can mand and tact and echo, but their articulation isn't very clear. And so we need to look at these three groups separately. When a child comes to you, you want to try and kind of decide what is their skill level. If they don't have very much speech, few vocals, very few vocalizations, there is no getting around it. You've got to have more raw material to work with. Before you start setting speech targets, I would set a speech range for echoics, for example. Keep the bar very, very low, and it's going to be fun to hang out with me and learn how to say what I say. We're going to play peekaboo. We're going to do all kinds of fun face games where you look at me. I often set a child right on my lap if they fit, and we'll work on just having lots of fun, making sounds. I might get on the floor and roll around with them, or do some physical kinds of, bouncing them on my knee, or tickling them, or spinning them around, or whatever they enjoy. Often we work on these kinds of things in the swing or on the merry-go-round or something, so that making sounds in general are fun and nothing is ever wrong. On a formal basis, we would address this through specific procedures of stimulus-stimulus pairing, some vocal variability training as well, where we reinforce any sound that's different than the one that you made before, so that we begin to get some variation. So if you only say ba, 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 and that's all you can say ever, then I don't have anything to work with except that one syllable. So I want something else to work with, and often some of the vocal variability training is useful. And you can read about SSP and vocal variability training in various journals. We've some colleagues and I have published papers in both of those areas, and so have others. So primarily those papers, I think, appear in the analysis of verbal behavior. And then we track the vocalization baseline, which I'll show you how to do. If we have weak speech, then we use a two-pronged approach. And you have a couple of handouts that I'll show you in a minute. where you work on both the echoic and the mand kind of at the same time, for sure on the same day. Another error, not really an error, but one of the gaps that I see with people that are working on speech is that they don't work on it enough. They might work on it for 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the afternoon. If you think about some of these baby videos that I've shown you, those children are not just working that muscular system 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the afternoon. They're pretty much doing it all of their waking time. And so figure out some rule of thumb that works for you and for the staff that you're working with. For the folks that I work with, I tell them, and this changes from time to time, but I often tell them, try and get in a minute or two of echoic practice every 10 or 15, 20 minutes. Hopefully you can get more than a minute or two in. If you can get a minute or two every 5 minutes, that's even better. But it reminds the teachers that, whoa, if we want this child to talk, we're going to have to work on talking. I know time is short. We don't have all the time in the world. But if you expect speech to occur, and you've got a child at this level with very, very few vocalizations, weak speech, not very good echoics, you'll have to decide on what your priorities are. It's going to take a lot of practice, because you see what typically developing children can do after all the practice that they get. And then for speech that's under verbal control, for poor articulation, we simply work on improving that form through the echoic. I think I'll make this point later. So let's move on to speech 201. That was speech 101. And you have a phonetics cue card in your packet, and if you didn't print it out, there were some available in the back of the room, and then a practice sheet. But can anybody read this? This is written in International Phonetic Alphabet. What about the first word? What do you think that word says? Welcome to the workshop. I should tell the speech pathologist it's not fair. You're not supposed to say anything. This sentence, glad you could come today. And this one, let's have some fun with phonetics. So what's the advantage of writing things in phonetics? And why would I spend time in this talk or this workshop wanting you to be exposed to phonetics? Well, let me just, I'll just leave this up on the screen. Look at the first word in the second sentence, glad. Okay, that a sound that we write with kind of an AE together, that's the same sound in the word cat and hat. And if you wanted your child to say that, how would you write down on a piece of paper that sound? If you wrote an A, the letter A, like it is when you spell the word, how would that letter be different if I were looking at those targets from the A in let's see, what other word do we have here? Suggestion? Can you think of the A where there's a silent E at the end, like lace, gate, pizza? There's an A there. How would you write the so that I would know that that letter A in that word sounds like and in this word it sounds like a? What if you only had a as the target, not in any word? I just want to teach the child to say a. You can see the great advantage in knowing how to write the vowels for sure, regardless of the consonants, but how to write the vowels in phonetics, because there's universal application. I could listen to somebody speaking, and so could any of the speech paths in the room, listen to someone speak in another language and write it down in phonetics and be able to read it fairly accurately, because we're writing down how the words sound and not how they're spelled. So on your phonetic cue card, let me just kind of take you through this, because I would encourage you all to learn how to write the vowels for sure, and maybe some of the consonants as well. It's not that hard. You could probably do it over the weekend. I think the reason that it takes a whole semester course for speech pathologists to learn phonetics is because we're learning how to do it quickly and how to transcribe what other people are saying quickly. But in terms of your purposes in identifying speech targets for the child that you want to communicate to all your staff so you can track what they can say, it would be a great, great advantage if you and your staff can write those vowels in phonetics. So on the left-hand side of the sheet are the vowels, and most of the vowels in English, and some of the diphthongs, that is, two vowels together. So we have E, I, A, O, U, and U. And then the diphthongs that are on this sheet are I, ow, and I, oi, and ow. On the right-hand side are some of the consonants. Not all of the consonants, not all the phonemes in English are on this card, but a good number. And on the left-hand side of the consonant section, here we have plosives, some continuous restricted airflow sounds, some nasal sounds, and then some other sounds. It's good to know what kind of a sound you're going for. That's the sound in the target word that you want the child to learn, because you can use one to facilitate learning another one. So for the plosives, for example, we have three different sets. We've got P and B, and T and D, and K and G. For all of these, where there's two sounds in a box, the top one is no vocal cord movement. It's an unvoiced sound. And the bottom one is vocal cords turn on. So the P and the B are made in exactly the same place in your mouth, with exactly the same articulators, same muscles, and so on, with the exception that if you want to say B, you have to turn the vocal cords on. The same for T and D, and K and G, S and Z. S is exactly the same as the Z sound, except for S, you don't have any vocal fold movement, and for Z, you do. This becomes really useful to know when you're setting up targets and you're trying to decide, what am I asking this child to do and how hard is it? Let me draw your attention for just a minute, because we'll talk about it later in an example, to the word chess and the word jam over here. For chess, you see that the CH sound is really two sounds put together. It's the T sound followed by the SH sound. So that's what CH is. It's first you make a T real fast, and then you say the SH sound, ch, 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 and we call that sound CH, or ch. So if you've got a child that's saying ser for chair, or tear for chair, that's really useful information, because you can tell which part of that combined CH sound they're saying, and you will have some idea of where to go from there, and we'll show you a little bit of that in a minute. So this is a worksheet that I gave you, and in a previous workshop that I gave, we actually took 10 minutes and we filled this out, but I think what we'll do is use your phonetic cue card, and let's just do a couple of them. The sounds along the top are on your phonetic cue card in the vowel section, and from left to right we have E, I, A, O, U, and U. So let's take a look at that E, the one on the far left. Can you find a word that belongs in, the E sound? Tree, yep. So the third one down here, tree, we would spell that with a T and an R and then this letter I, and that would be the phonetic spelling for tree. So it makes it easy to know what the child is supposed to say. How about this sound that we talked about before, this ah sound? Can you find one that belongs in? Ah. Anybody? Cat, hat, And so here is the spelling, the phonetic spelling for these, and there's some variation. Not all speech pathologists might write them exactly like this, but I think we're close enough for today's purposes. Actually have an error on here, so I'm going to have you help me correct it. This is supposed to be hot. Here we have hat right here, and we've got this H and then that ah sound and then the t sound, and here we have it the same way. They can't both be right. So, so I'll just tell you, this one is wrong. That's the wrong symbol. What symbol do you think I should put in there? The half circle? Okay, let me make that sound for you. That sound is aw. Aw. Depending on what part of the U.S. you're from, you may indeed say hot. Hot. Sorry? This one? So that's That's So that would be hut. Hut. That would be the sound. Good guess, though. And then if you're from New Jersey, then you would say, dog instead of dog. So yeah, there's all kind of I once was talking there and learned that I was saying it wrong. So this actually, if you say like I do, hot, where's the up here? From the left, how many in would the sound be? 6. So it really would be just that A. So you can see the difficulty, but it's not that hard. I think you're beginning to catch on to those. I do have a couple of these cue cards already filled out with the answer sheet if you want at the break or afterward to take a look at any of these. I'm happy to, and I'd be happy to send it to you as well. This would be a good exercise to do as you're learning over the weekend. You would just take your phonetics cue card, have the vowel section in front of you, say the word to yourself, and however you say it, for example, if you say hot, not hot, but you say hot, then you would indeed choose that half open circle and fill those out, and then you can check yourself against those answers. So let's take a break at this point for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'll start right back up again at very close to 2:20. Up again, and I can be around after the workshop, the talk is over if some of you have questions or if you want to pick up on a conversation that we already started. We may take another short break in a little while. I'll poll everybody and see how we're doing, and then we can decide at that point. So in starting a speech program, and again, we're primarily looking at kids that are making a few sounds but not very many, and you really are kind of not sure what should that speech program consist of. What would we do? Well, you have to know what you have to work with. You've got to know what your baseline is. You've got to know what sounds are available in the child's repertoire right now. You have all these handouts, so I'm going to kind of go through this in a list, and then we'll talk specifically about the different areas. After you find out what's available, what sounds are they making, then we're going to test those echoically, and that might be formally with the ESA, with the echoic skills assessment on the VB map or any other echoic test. But I also do it informally, where I put the child on my lap facing me, and I just ask them to start making sounds. I say wah wah, say ba, say bee, say ooh, say wah, and see what they can say. And I begin to track that in some sort of an organized fashion so that I've got an idea of how far can I push the envelope with these single and double syllables and find out what they can say echoically. Then what we're trying to do is to turn those into vocal mands. And so in order to do that, we have to list the potential reinforcers, and then we identify our speech targets related to those reinforcers. And then we're going to work on that. We're going to program a high number of echoic trials and man trials during the day. Somebody asked me earlier, what kind of a high number do you think is a high number? And I said, like 800 to 1,000 trials a day. But those are not necessarily formal trials. And don't hold me to the 800 to 1,000. I'd be happy if we had 600. But we need more than 20. We need more than 50. We need thousands and thousands of echoic practices a week, because an echoic model puts the target up there for the child to hit. If there's no target, it's like trying to throw a dart at a dartboard blindfolded. I don't know what I'm aiming for. And the problem with the echoic model versus a visual model, like a sign, for example, is you can hold some part of that sign so it's still visually a stimulus that's visually available to the learner. With an echoic model, the stimulus is gone. It's here and now it's gone as soon as I say it. So I have to say it again, and that's fine. You can say it a few times. But that's why echoic training is hard. The stimulus is difficult to attend to. And it's hard if you don't have that fluency with movement of the musculature to know what am I supposed to do with this stuff to hit that echoic auditory stimulus, that model, that target over there. How do I do that? Where do I put all this stuff? And then as you work on these things, you'll modify your targets. So let me just kind of move to figuring out what the child is saying. This is a form that I use for taking a vocalization baseline. I give the child a bunch of toys. If there's an adult there, I say, you can play with the child, but don't say anything, because I want the video to pick up just what the child is saying. This particular grid is a 30-minute grid divided into 30-second intervals. So every 30 seconds, I write down what the child said in that 30-second grid. And I've got my own sort of squiggle system along with phonetics on here, which most speech pathologists do. But this vocalization baseline, and you could do it in the morning, you could do it in the afternoon again. It doesn't have to be 30 minutes, it could be 5 minutes. You could get several vocalization baselines over the course of a couple of days if you wanted to. But it will yield two very important pieces of information for you. If you have a child that's not making very many sounds, this is where you really want to start to find out what sounds are they making and how often are they making them. That is, do they only make sounds in very specific situations, or like typically developing children, are they exercising the tongue and the rest of the vocalization musculature all day long? That's, of course, ideal. So the information that we're getting here, after we write down exactly what they say, and if you don't know how to do this, you can just put a plus or a minus in the box and you'll still get some good information. But it's helpful if you can have a speech pathologist work with you to know exactly what are they saying. And if you haven't learned phonetics yet and you can't really tell exactly what they're saying, you can still write down the letters that you think are corresponding with the sounds that you hear. So we get the available vowels and we get the available consonants. So with this particular child, see if I can move a little closer here. This child said the sound 22 times and said the E sound 4 times in that 30 minutes. So I know that the sound and the I sound that he said 46 times is a lot easier for him. It's way more available to him and to me as the teacher than the E sound is. So if I've got a child that's not making very many sounds, I don't want to choose something that is hard for him. I want to choose something that's easy for him and get the frequency up. Now this child is making lots and lots of sounds. The consonants, what did we hear in terms of consonants? We're hearing the D sound, or D, 35 times in 30 minutes, and the SH sound only 3 times. So I know I'm not going to start by choosing the SH sound with some vowels because that's not a readily available sound for him, but eventually we'll get there. Well, the other important piece of information other than the available vowels and the available consonants is the frequency of the sound making. Now, in the 60 intervals that we have here, this child vocalized in 58 of those 60 intervals, so 97%. This child might not even really need a lot of vocal variability, stimulus pairing training. We may be ready to go right into some pretty heavy-duty echoic training. But this is not the profile of most of the kids that I see. Most of the children are vocalizing in maybe 10 to 20, 25% of those intervals. The rest of the intervals are blank. So what that tells me is they're not playing with their voice. No vocal play, not very much babbling. The system is not getting exercised, so the fluency is not going to be very good, and it's going to be difficult for them to practice talking. After we find out what those available vowels and consonants are, we put them on a worksheet right here, and I like to write them down twice. I put some of the vowels down that are most frequently occurring, and then I put some of the consonants down, and I like to write them twice so that I can put the vowels and the consonants before and after, because my job is to now start to kind of do a little puzzle work and configure these in any kind of a combination that I can come up with to see how can I make these be words? How can I turn this into a vocal command? So I know now that the child could say B, and the child could say Eb, and the child could say Beeb, and the child could say BB. Theoretically, because I know these are all available sounds. So I know that's not going to be too hard to teach them to do that. I know they also can say T and Teeb and two and toot and two, and they might even be able to say 2T. So you're kind of beginning to look for some kind of a pattern of something that you might be able to turn into words. But what words do you select? Oops. The words that you select are going to be related to their high preference items that we like to call potential reinforcers. So it just so happens in this example that this child likes chips, juice, and music. So I again go to kind of this puzzle combining these different syllables in some way, and I decide, let's go with ooh and teach them how to say juice. And so how would we do that? Well, we work from a bottom to top sort of a configuration that we often call them shells. Nancy Kaufman uses that word a lot in her speech praxis kit and in her K&K cards and the C&C cards and so on. So one example would be you would start with a ooh, and then once they can say that echoically, that now becomes the manned target. When you say ooh, I will reinforce that with some juice under conditions where I know that you want juice. What we're doing with this card that you have in your packet, with this echoic to man training card, is we're putting the ooh, and I have this in a slide in a minute, we're putting the ooh as a prerequisite for the manned. But how are they going to benefit? How will they ever say ooh? They have to say it when you say it. That's how they learn to say it. Or you can grab it when it randomly occurs and reinforce it then. And either of those certainly is fine. So once they learn to say ooh, then we add a consonant. It doesn't matter which one. How do I know which one to choose? Because I do some sort of free-form investigation. I give them lots and lots of practice with me during the day or with their teacher, and we just run through a long list. Usually it comes out of my head, but you can write the list down, and you can begin to simply ask the child, say oot, or say t, or say to. How easy is that? Do the same thing with the S, and then you'll be able to decide what that second target should be. Should it be oot or should it be oos? So either one of those, and I often will kind of not know, and so I'll be ready to reinforce either one that they say and that seems easy for them. We then add another sound, and now we have toos or shoos, and then choose and then juice. And there's sort of a selection pattern to that. But I'm going to skip the stuff on the echoic assessment. But let's talk for a minute about what this hierarchy is and why we're using this particular hierarchy. There's a speech pathologist, a speech scientist out of Montreal some years ago, Dr. Daniel Ling, and he spent most of his life working with folks with profound sensory neural hearing losses, teaching them to talk. And his sequence works whether you're working with hearing impaired folks or anybody else that isn't speaking. It follows typical vocal development. And that's why I use it. And it seems to make the most sense, I think, when you look at how typically developing kids are talking. So what do we first do? We get vocalizations in place. And that's going to ensure adequate breath flow. So we have duration changes, loudness changes, and pitch changes. And then we begin to pull out those kingpin vowels that we can really reinforce, ah, e, and oo. Now, if they can't say ah, or e, or oo, we work on any vowels that they can say. But I like to get those three in place if it's at all possible. And then what we do is we take those vowels and we surround them with consonants in different vowel contexts. So from ba, we teach ba-ba. From me, we would teach me-me. And those are what we call reduplicated. It's the same one repeated. There's not a lot of load on the tongue to move into a different position. And from ba-ba, we would then go to babi. From me-me, we would go to mommy. Or from mama, we would go to mommy. Where you have to not only say the vowel that you said in the reduplicated, but now you have to get that tongue ready to go into position to make a different sound. And when we see the breakdown right there, we know that fluency is not part of this kid's skill yet. Because if it were, that increased responsibility, that increased difficulty of a different context for the tongue would not throw them, but it often does. Now, in addition to kind of knowing that this is your second priority after you get vowels in place, you have to it helps to know what kind of consonants you're talking about. And so we look at what we call consonants by manner. So the manner, and this is on your phonetic cue card, the manner of production of this sound, and this sound is what we would call a nasal sound. We resonate the sound through our nose, and so the manner of that production is nasal. The manner of the production of B, P, T, D, and KG is not at all a nasal. It's what we call a plosive. It's an explosion. We put a little wall up in our mouth, either our lips or our tongue, against the roof of our mouth, or against the back of our velum or our soft palate, and we hold it there for a moment. We build up intraoral air pressure, and we explode it. We let the wall down, and out comes the sound, like a little explosion. And that's why the manner of these sounds is called plosive. So it's helpful to know what those manners are, because you have to know what you're asking the child to do. You also need to know, and then we have some other sounds that don't fit those patterns or are called something else that we're not going to really deal with today. But these manner differences, we need to know whether these are front sounds, that is lip sounds, whether they're alveolar sounds, that is right behind the upper teeth. That's where the tongue goes for those three sounds. Or are they velar? Are they way in the back of the throat? Where the soft palate and the tongue have to come together. That's what those sounds are. And then there's some sounds in the middle, kind of the hard palate. We call those palatal sounds, and we call them some other things too, glides and so on, with the o and the or the r. The o sometimes is actually more of an alveolar sound. I've seen it in that situation as well. But you need to know, to the best of your ability, at least be aware that different sounds are made in different ways and that they fit certain patterns. You can use these then to facilitate the acquisition of the next ones. And then we work on putting those vowels in blends and clusters of consonants all together. And the very last thing we worry about is whether the child is saying a voice or a voiceless sound. But this sequence of teaching is really critical. It helps us know that we want reduplicated sounds before we want them to alternate the vowel. So if I said to you before this talk, what's harder to say, mommy or mama? You might not know, but now you would know it's probably harder to say mommy than to say mama, because the vowel has to change. How does the vowel change? The tongue moves position. So we would teach bye-bye before we would teach baby, if the child wasn't able to say baby. If they can say baby, then this doesn't apply. We would teach front consonants before we would teach the ones behind the teeth, in general. Not always, but in general. So we would teach mommy before we would teach daddy. Why? Because it's easier to see. It's probably easier to produce because you're only having to move your lips for the M sound and not the tongue for the D sound. So the tongue can stay in position for the vowel without moving. But if you're saying daddy, the tongue has to be in one position for the D, a different position for the A, go back to the D position, and a completely different position for the E sound at the end of daddy. Three different tongue positions, 4 different positionings. And so the responsibility on that tongue, the complexity and the load is greater. And then the same, we would work on consonants right behind the teeth before the velar consonants. So teddy would theoretically be easier to say than cookie. Now again, you know, there are all kinds of exceptions to this rule, and let me point this out, my caveat at the bottom. Typical acquisition may not at all follow this sequence. You might say, well, you know what, I've got a brand new kid that can say ga, 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 or gati, 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 gati. Great. That's terrific if they can do that. But if they can't do that, if speech teaching is necessary because of where they're at with their skill level, then this kind of a sequence can be supportive. So for example, if they can't make the K and the G sound, but they can make the T and the D sound, you simply ask them to make the T and the D sound, but to hold down the tip of their tongue. And that tongue will immediately compensate by lifting in the back to make the K and the G sound, and then you've got it. And there's a lot of other little sort of tricks of the trade like that. So let's say that, that the child really loves tacos or his teddy bear, and you want to, but he can't say T and he can't say D. What would that sequence, that teaching sequence look like so that you could build the manned shell and you would know what to work on echoically? This is what they have to learn how to do. They first have to be able to say the T with some vowels. It doesn't matter what vowels, but I like ah, e, and oo to start with if they're at all available. So we've got ta, they say ta, say t, say tu with the main vowels. Then they've got to be able to reduplicate that, which shouldn't be too hard if they can say it. They should be able to say 3 in a row, and what we want is 3 per second. Not ta, good job, ta, good job, ta, good job. We want ta, 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 t, t, t. 2, 2, 2, 3 per second, so that we know that things are moving smoothly and the breath stream is not being compromised or altered in some unusual way. And then we want the same letter, the same sound, alternated with different vowels. So ta, ti, tu, tu, ta, ti, ti, tu, ta. We want 3 per second of those if it's at all possible, so they stop really focusing on tongue position and they're focusing on fluency. And so I often will work with kids with my mouth actually covered as opposed to look right at my mouth. So sometimes I might actually be in this position where I cover my mouth and they are now having to listen to the auditory signal. And sometimes not, but that's something that you might want to try if they're focusing too much. When we work on speech, we often say, do this, you know, or move your mouth like this and so on. And often I think that's premature. You might not need to do that. And then even harder than that would be where you would not only alternate the vowels, but you would alternate the consonants as well. So ti, ma, bi, tu, ba, we, no, ta, mi, or no, ta, me. So we need all of those kinds of odd-sounding combinations. And the reason is because all of those kinds of combinations occur in these sorts of phrases. And we'll take a look in a bit about co-articulation, what that looks like and what it is, and how one sound is influenced by the sound that's next to it. So if you want these sorts of phrases to sound normal, to sound fluent, then you've got to work on fluency at this sub-level of sort of nonsense syllables. Now, that doesn't mean that all you do is work on nonsense syllables. I prefer to immediately go into man training. So whatever it is, this would be the echoic practice supporting the manned training separately. So we kind of have 2 sets of practice going on throughout the day. I think we'll skip over the ISA here. And Let me just skip on ahead. I think we've covered this information as well. So why are we, you probably hear me say the word syllable a lot, and I don't tend to talk too much about words, like let's teach the child 2-word phrases or 3-word phrases or whatever. And here's why. So here's a syllable. 1 syllable, and here's 1 syllable, but the complexity level is pretty different. Here's a word that's also 1 syllable, and here's another word that's many syllables, and here's a 1-syllable sentence, and this is a sentence as well. So it's not very useful for me to talk about words. Like a 2-word phrase could be this second word, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, and dog at the end of it. So that's much harder than a 2-word phrase like hi mommy or hi mom or go or bye bye. That's a 2-syllable phrase. Go mommy is a 2-word phrase. So you can see how you kind of get all caught up with what is it that we're talking about. These 3 examples, refrigerator, my cat is light brown, and mommy push me please, all have 5 syllables in them. But refrigerator has 8 different phoneme sounds, and it's 1 word. It's got my cat is light brown has 12 sounds and 5 words, and mommy push me please has 8 sounds and 4 words. So it's not helpful to talk about words, but syllables are syllables. You're always talking about the same thing. And so I would strongly urge you to talk about the syllable targets. How many syllables are in that target? If it's phrases, it can be 6-syllable phrases and so on. This might actually be a good time for me to draw your attention to a handout that's in your packet. It's called Echoic Phrases, and on my copy there's some on the front and some on the back. They're numbered. Let me see if I have a handout of this. Just 1 second. I guess it's I think it's up here in the future. Okay, but they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Everything in column 3 has 3 syllables. Everything in column 6 has 6 syllables. And so you can use this as kind of just a guide to do some testing if you want to see how much integrity is there in their, how much consistency is there in a child's ability to repeat a 3-syllable phrase or a 6-syllable phrase or whatever. You can look for where the breakdown is, and then you can determine maybe where you can start. I often see folks with kids that cannot even repeat 2 syllables, and they're being asked to say, I want cookie please, kind of in a connected phrase. So let's talk about where you get your targets from. I know some folks were asking about that earlier, and it seems to be really one of the biggest problems that people kind of don't know. What do I choose to work on? Well, you can go through the SAS checklist, which is the speech acquisition sequence checklist that you have in your packet. And it's a very simple checklist that I made up. I think I do have a slide on that. And just simply mark the green boxes of what the child can do, either echoically or just free operant. You happen to hear them say it, and that will help you pinpoint where you need to select in terms of their skills. Once you've selected, you can also look at vowel consonant charts to decide, should I be working on 1 syllable, 2 syllable, 3 syllables? What are the sounds? We get those from the vocalization baseline observation chart that we looked at, and then we work on them in shells. So this is a shell from Nancy Kaufman's speech praxis kit. And it's to teach shoe, and all it is, and I think if you're a speech pathologist, we would all agree that you could pretty much write different sounds in here if you wanted to, but you do have to start with oo because that's the only vowel in this word. But whether or not you teach to next or su next will depend on what your learner can say. But in general, you first bring their response oo under echoic control, and now that's the manned target, and to becomes the echoic target. And then you bring that under echoic control, and then it becomes the manned target, and su, and so on. Why do we look at this particular progression? This is the sound that we want them to say, the SH sound, shoe, but it's too hard. This is a continuous restricted airflow kind of a sound. We could teach them to say foo. That's the same manner of sound. That would be fine. SH is unvoiced, and so is F, and so is TH. Thu, we could teach either one of those, and that would be fine. But this particular learner, in this particular example, was not able to say that, and so we select the T sound. And we get to, and then we get su, and then we get shu. And the way we do that is by differential reinforcement of the echoic response. But what they're doing here is learning to move their tongue from one position to another. And under conditions of reinforcement, that will occur. If that step is too big, then you shorten the step. And then we do lots of daily practice. Now you'll see here that we have program a high number of daily echoic trials, program a high number of daily man trials. Those don't occur at the same time. But let's take a look at balloon as an example. And I printed mine out on and laminate it so that then we can write on it. There's one on both sides for a couple of targets per child, but you can have 10 of these for every child if you want, or only one. And then you can erase them as time goes on. It's really, really important that your staff knows where the child is. That target, that skill may change from morning to afternoon. And if you're not meeting regularly, then somewhere it needs to be easy for the next staff person that's working with the child to be able to know what can they do, what can't they do. So for balloon, for example, they have to be able to say the vowel. They have to be able to say one of the vowels, either the oo or the but they have to be able to say it. If they can't say it, that's what you work on. As soon as they can say it, that could become now the manned. When they say ooh, we're going to give the balloon. And you tell everybody, it's not that hard to stay one step ahead of them. You tell everybody on the staff, when you hear them say ooh, and you know that there's an MO condition, contingency set up, reinforce that with a balloon. Meanwhile, you teach ba. We'll select here as the vowel as opposed to oo. You teach ba echoically. It shouldn't be a real big leap if you've got the already to add the b to it and get ba. So you work on that echoically 2 minutes out of every 5, 2 minutes out of every 10. But you don't just say ba, say ba, say ba, say ba, say ba. You work on it maybe in a selection of 30 trials, 20 trials, maybe you only get 10 in, and you sprinkle this in more than you sprinkle in other stuff. But the other stuff that you sprinkle in are those assessment syllables that you want to know. I wonder if they can say wa. I wonder if they can say e. I wonder if they can say boo, boo, boo. Because you want to kind of test all of the repertoires that are necessary for any other possible mands. So I have a long list of all the different things that we might want to ask them to say, but in that 2 minutes of practice or 10 trials of practice or however long, however many we get, we mostly sprinkle in that target as an echoic. And we don't stop and try it again. We just move on. We reinforce the ones that are correct. And because we have so much practice, We don't have to stop and try again and do it better because it's going to show up in just a second or two again when I say it anyway. You can't take data during this. You take your data separately, get your probe data, and then put the data sheet away and turn your brain on so that you can pay attention to what they're doing, but you can't take data and do this kind of training simultaneously. At least I can't. So as soon as you have ba echoically, now as a man is no longer going to cut it. Now they've got to say ba for the man. And you know they will because they can do it echoically. So now you're raising the bar. This is now the new man target and what will be the next echoic target, ba-oo. So you reinforce a high number of ba manned trials at the same time that you are reinforcing echoic ba-oo trials to get that other vowel in there. And then ba-oo becomes the new manned. As soon as it's mastered echoically, it's now the new manned target, ba-oo. And you raise the bar on this one, ba-loo, or ba-woo, or something in that spot to take that place. Now this one's kind of a tough one because we abandoned the ba just to get the loon. Let me move over to Cheeto. First starting place, E. It could have been O, but for this purpose, we'll just say E. So as soon as we get this prerequisite E echoically, it's the manned. And this becomes the echoic target, EO. As soon as we have that, the EO becomes the manned target, and TO now becomes the echoic target, and so on and so forth. And you move up the ladder kind of on a diagonal until you get up to Cheeto. And the same for music. There are different ways that you can write these. I don't always write them with the same syllables in here. It depends on what the child can say. Sometimes I rewrite them midstream. And you can learn to do this as well. I'm happy to send you some of these specific slides if you don't have them. And then you modify your targets. And that's fairly easy to do. Okay. So this is the speech acquisition sequence card. The instructions are on the back. We'll skip the instructions. You can read those yourself. But what I wanted to point out to you here is this is the Ling sequence of sound acquisition. And so lots of times people say, well, okay, I understood what you said, but I need something in my hands that when I go in and talk with this kid or observe this child, I can really mark something down to kind of put me in the ballpark so I know what kinds of, what the level of targets is. Not the target. Not whether it's baby, mama, taco, or blankie, not the specific topography of the target, but the difficulty level of the target. What ballpark are we in? So the first thing that you do is you look at level 1, vocalizations, and you mark an X or a plus in the blue-green box if you hear pitch variations. If you hear loudness variations, duration variations, if you do the vocalization baseline and it's over 70%, then you mark that they have a high vocalization baseline. You've got a lot of material to work with. And so if all 4 of those are marked, you put an X or a plus in the yellow box that says level 1, and you go down to level 2. And now we look at vowels and diphthongs. Can they make any vowels? And you'll see a lot of blank white boxes in there for you to write in. Maybe they don't say ah, or e, or oo, or I, or oi, or ow. Maybe they say ah and and I. Those are not on there. So you write those in there from your phonetic cue card, which I'm sure everybody's going to learn as soon as they get out of here this afternoon. That's going to be, I know, your first priority. So you write those in there, and as soon as they have 3 vowels, then that's enough. You put an X in the yellow box at level 2 or a plus, and you move on to level 3. Are you hearing consonant vowels? Are they saying ma, or ma, ma, ma. Actually, ma, ma, ma is level 4. But do you ever hear them say ma, or ba, or ti, or ga, or gu? Are you hearing anything with a consonant vowel or a vowel consonant, or a consonant vowel consonant? One syllable. And if you are, mark those boxes and then check off level 3 and go down to level 4. Are you hearing reduplicated sounds? Ma, 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 ga, 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 bye, bye, those kinds of things. Are you hearing mixed sounds where the consonants and the vowels begin to change? And so find the level that you're hearing, either echoically or free operant. And I usually check both. And that puts me in the ballpark to know when I'm deciding what mands we want to work on. Let's say they love bubbles, but you haven't even checked level 2 yet on this form. What's your target going to be for bubbles? It's going to be and you're going to be happy with that. But if they're already saying ba, that's a level 3 skill, and they love bubbles, what can your target now be? Ba-ba, and that's a level 4 skill. And ba-bus, or just bubba, I'd probably be happy with for a while. So, and then level 5 skills where we're actually getting into some really hard stuff like the blends, still in one syllable combinations. So this is just a guide sheet to help you, and it's a fairly new tool that I've come up with, so I welcome your feedback and what's working, what's not working. Feel free to email me and let me know. If you're like me, things are always in a state of flux with your forms and your tools and so on. So we already went through that. Let me just play a quick video for you here of, this is the little guy with the kitty and the white chairs that you saw before. He's playing with some shapes. And I just want you to listen for the level 1 skill, which is the variations in the pitch, loudness, and duration of his voice. You might not recognize what the vowels are yet. There are lots of vowels in there. But what I want you to listen for are those level 1 skills, that he can make a vowel sound and vary the pitch and the duration and the loudness of it. Okay, so we're hearing some short ones, we're hearing some long ones. And in the intervals, we would actually write those down. He happened to be vocalizing in 9 of the 14 3-second intervals that I scored there. So, you know, he's not vocalizing on a lot, but he's busy with his puzzle shapes and so on. So you wouldn't want that to be your only data point in terms of, and then conclude, oh, we've got a problem here with vocalizing. Here he is again, and what I'd like you to do is to just take a look. He's playing by himself here, and then we'll look at another quick video where he's with mommy, and we'll look at the frequency of the vocalizations. Okay, so you get the idea, and then what we would do is we would look at a grid. Oh, I guess this one is the one, 64% of the 3-second intervals, he vocalized on 9 out of the 14. And if you can't quickly hear and write, transcribe phonetically what they're saying, this is useful information. You won't know what they said, but you'll know how frequently they're making sounds. And once you get a baseline, that is a few data points of this for your kids, then you'll know what are we ready really for a speech training program? Is there enough raw material to work with here? Even though I might not know what the raw material is, I might not be able to know exactly what those vowels or consonants are, you can always have someone else listen to it and put your heads together or give it to a speech pathologist to listen to and transcribe it. But at least you'll know what's the amount of sound making that we're getting. Now this one that you saw, I'll just play a short part of this again. We have an adult present.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, when we've got mommy saying something, now I can respond to what mommy said. There's a bit more auditory stimulation there. You know, it's kind of hard to compare these two, and this is not a formal study, obviously, but the vocalization goes up. So the reason that I want the child to not the parent to not vocalize with a child, number one is to not interfere with a videotape, but number two, I want to hear what's the worst possible score that they could get. I want to know what are they generally doing when they're by themselves, because that tells me one thing. It doesn't tell me anything at all about the verbal operant function, the echoic, the man, the tact, the intraverbal. This little guy was probably emitting some intraverbal responses with mommy. What it tells me is, do they enjoy the sound of their own voice? Is their own voice automatically reinforcing when there's nobody else around? Does it sound good to them when they're making sounds? If their own voice has no automatic reinforcing value for them, we've got a big problem. And we need to deal with that, because what you don't want is a child that only talks when you tell him to talk. You want a child that talks under other operant conditions. Okay. Let me just ask you to kind of go through this little task where you, this is a familiar saying that children say. It's kind of a sing-songy thing that they say when they're little. And it illustrates why we work on vowels first. So here's the phrase, and the information that you're getting is from just the consonants. Most of the consonants are correct in here, but I've changed all the vowels. So you only have information from the consonants. And the best way to do this is to say it to yourself real fast and see what it sounds like. So I'll say it a couple of times. Foreign dows cow parse, lice ear zip hours. Can't understand why nobody got that. Foreign dows cow parse, lice ear zip hours. Does that sound like anything that rhymes with anything that you've heard? Well, I'd be surprised if anybody got it. This is the same thing with the vowels intact, and the consonants are different. So you're getting information from the vowels. Anybody want to take a stab at what you think this little kid's saying is? How did you get that? Do you know why you got that? Because it rhymes. rhyming, and rhyming is pretty fun. That's why we like Dr. Seuss and Sam I Am and all those kinds of things. The information is carried primarily by the vowels. And so if a child, I was working with a child at one point who was very upset that I didn't understand what she wanted, and she was tugging on me and kicking me and crying, and she was really unhappy. And here's what she was saying. She was saying, "Kadu, kadu, kadu, kadu." And I had no idea what she was asking for, but I clearly had a K sound and a little tiny bit of an N sound and a D sound in there. And Mom, I looked at Mom and I said, what does she want? And Mom said, she wants candy. She had all the consonants and none of the vowels. If she would have come up to me and said, a-e, 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 I would have at least been able to get in the ballpark. So it's to your benefit and to the kid's ultimate benefit, the child that you're working with, to work on vowels first. Get those vowels in place, and rarely do we work on consonants in isolation. Okay, let me introduce you to the vowel neighborhoods, because this is how we make decisions about what we're gonna select. So this, the speech pathologist here will recognize this as sort of a stylized picture of first and second vowel format frequencies, but for our own purposes, just think about it as three neighborhoods of, we've got the E and the ah and the oo. Those are kind of our kingpin vowels. And then we've got all of the other vowels in there, and they were on your sheet earlier. We've got E, I, A, ah, and then we've got and like in put, aw, o, and oo. And so it's helpful to know if you want the child to say cat, and he says coat, how are you going to get from there to there? What would you select as a target? Well, you would maybe start reinforcing, oh, but that's really not really even in the same neighborhood. We want something in the a neighborhood. So we know that if this to this is too big of a step, he just can't reach that step, then let's give him a smaller step. We could have him say cut or cot and get us closer to cat. So once we get to that next closer step, then the tongue has less of a distance to travel. It's not so hard. And that's why we use successive approximations and shaping teaching. That's what shaping is the steps are too big. That's why we have to shape interim steps, wait for them to occur, and then differentially reinforce them. See if you can count or identify the different vowels this little child is making. Whoops. What a cutie. Well, almost all of them I heard, and actually when I've listened to it subsequent times, I actually think that we're also hearing the ah sound, and I'd be surprised if we weren't hearing maybe a little bit of ooh. I thought I heard something that kind of sounded like ayabu, a little bit of I love you in there, so possibly most of those vowels. But the important thing to sort of take away from this is that child is in all three of those neighborhoods. Something up here, something around here in the middle, and then something kind of down here. And the neighborhoods kind of change. It's hard to tell whether this house is in this neighborhood or in this neighborhood, whether that vowel is. But that's okay. At least it gives you a schematic, some sort of a map that you can follow if you're trying to get from here to there. And I think this is all self-explanatory. That's just more on the SAS that you have. Here's that echoic phrases list that I was mentioning earlier. And I often use this just kind of as a real informal. I might run through it maybe once a week. Just pick a few items from different levels of syllables and find out what's the child ready for. How many 4-syllable phrases can this child say fairly accurately? And what I don't so much care about is the articulation. For example, if I say give me pizza, this one here, and the child says, de pizza, okay, what do I want to know? I want to know I got 3 syllables right there. And then I might try it again. Give me pizza. And see if I get, did me, okay, what did I get there? I got 3.5 syllables. I got the P position of the lips, but no vowel afterwards. So I see that there's a little bit of progress there, but the vowel was missing. 4 syllables, kind of tough. 3 syllables, got it in spades. So we would probably start working at the 4-syllable level and toggle back and forth. Give me a 3, give me a 4-syllable, another 3-syllable, another 4-syllable. And we often do that with colors or numbers. My kitty, my big kitty. 1 kitty, 7 kitties. So you're adding another little syllable in there. And that's pretty easy to do. This is a video of a little guy that we worked on for quite some time on developing his speech. And I want to show you what this echoic practice kind of looks like and the precision that we're trying for. We rarely work on one consonant without a vowel, but with this little guy, you'll see in the video that one of the targets is fa, F-A, and another one is just the F sound. And the reason is because we noticed that he was always saying fa when we were getting ready to say something else, like fi or foo or something else. And so we wanted to isolate that out a little bit. Other than that, this looks pretty much like what we would do with most children. We don't give any edibles during echoic practice. We deliver them, but they don't take time to eat them. So for the real little kids that can't stand it that they're not having their cookie or their whatever right away, we let them build up in a little jar or a dish that they can see into, and we may only do 2 or 3 at a time until they get used to, oh, okay, I see how this works. This lady's going to let me have my cookies or my candy or my juice or whatever, but we want it to go fast. We don't take data. We just kind of keep track of it in our head. You'll see that she has a list over here. Well, you won't see, but you'll see her looking off to the side. That's where she has on the wall a list of the targets. And there are some targets repeated. If you have a specific target, now for him, we were just trying to get anything. So it's very broad. We didn't have a specific one that, as I said earlier, you would sprinkle in a lot of those, but you could easily do that. You could have something where you've got 15 b sounds and 5 to 10 of some other variety of other sounds, but predominantly b. We're going to get a lot of practice with that. Now, he's very accurate, so he almost always gets a little chip in the bucket, which he likes to play with at the end. But if they're not accurate and they get it wrong, you simply don't put the chip in the bucket. You go right on to the next trial, and then that one will, you don't have to worry about correction practice or going through an error correction procedure, because if you have enough echoic practice and you have enough trials, enough targets, then it'll show up again anyway. So we're doing hundreds and hundreds of trials a day. So we don't have to burden ourselves with either taking data during this, we can do that with probing, and we don't have to be burdened with correction trials. Sorry. So I don't know whether you noticed or not, but his mandible, he's not fluent. It's very hard for him, even at the single syllable level, to get the consonants and the vowels that are changing in the right place. Very difficult. And you see he's really, I mean, first we had to just teach him to look and listen, attend to the model. But the mandible is too far out of position. Ba, ba. Fa, fa. You'll never get fluent speech like that, which is why we now want to impose the 3 syllables per second rule. So, I'd like to finish up our last 45 minutes or so here. Are we good to continue on? Yes? No? Okay. Let me just say this. If you feel that you need to leave for a moment, go right ahead, and we won't call a break then. We'll just go on through. This is a flow chart that I want to take you through, a decision-making flow chart. You've got it. There are 2 or 3 different examples here, so if you miss it the first time around, stick with me. We'll give you several different examples. When you're trying to decide on a target, first question, is the vowel present? If the vowel is not present on whatever the word is, and where would you select that word from? From the list of the child's high preference items, right? So potential reinforcers, that's where your list comes from, and you select what they like. You then use the SAS card to sort of figure out, are we going to try and teach, or do we need to be at the vowel level, at the syllable level with some consonants, or can we go a little deeper depending on what the word is? If the word is taco, you want to know, can they say ah? Can they say oh? Can they say ta? Can they say taco? If they can't say that, can they say tato? No, they can't say that. How about ta-o? Can they say that? No? Okay, now we know we're at the ta level or the o level, but not both. And so then we'll move them down from there. So the question that you ask yourself in that procedure is there a vowel present? If it's not present, then you got to have a vowel. And you do that by looking at your vowel neighborhoods, get as close as you can, shape it, and then move forward. So now we have a vowel present. Is it the correct vowel? If it's not the correct vowel, you again continue to shape that to get from the one that's close in the neighborhood to right on the money, the vowel that we need. And if it is the correct vowel, let's say for taco we're just teaching O, then we establish that O, that syllable O, because vowels can be syllables. Single consonants are not syllables, but a vowel is a syllable. We establish that as verbal behavior. What does that mean? We reinforce O as a mand. That's right. Well, you could reinforce it as a tact as well, but we were mostly talking about mand training. And then you do the same thing for consonants, and then you put those together. Everything that you just saw on that flow chart is here on your decision worksheet, and you have this. I've laminated mine. We put the target up at the top. here, and then you just go through your question flow chart. Is there a vowel present? Is it the correct vowel? And then if that's the case, yes, you do this, no, you do this, and then some other comments over here that you can attend to. The comments over here tell you where you can refer to get information about this. Look at the vowel consonant chart, look at the SAS form, and so on and so forth. So hopefully that will be kind of another tool that you can use in your decision making. So for example, for the word puzzle, if we're starting at pa, this is just an example of how you might shape that to pa. Because it's reduplicated, it should be easy to do. And then you keep your 2 syllables with the consonant there, the P's, and now you work to change the vowel. So from pa to pa-po, and from pa-po, now we need to change that P to something that sounds more like a Z. And by doing some of that free form kind of testing with the child, where we just give them a lot of different things to say, and we see what lands where it lands, what can they say, what can they get close to. We determine this child can get close to the SH. So we teach pasho, and then paso, and then puzzle. So let's take a look at what this would look like. We briefly touched on this, cat. If we want the child to say cat, and the child can currently say tut for cat, the first question we ask ourselves is there a vowel there? Yes, there's a vowel there. Is it correct? No, it's the wrong vowel. So now we have to find the closest vowel. So we look at our vowel neighborhood chart, and we say, well, we want them to make this vowel right here, and they're making this vowel right here, You can see the great advantage in writing this phonetically. If you don't, it's very difficult to know anything about this and how to get the child on the right page. And let me tell you, it is so much easier to correct consonant misarticulations than vowel misarticulations. You don't want months and months and months to go by where the child is saying the wrong vowels echoically. So grab that and work with that one right off the bat, because the longer reinforcement history they have of saying the wrong vowel, the harder I think it is, at least, to remediate that. So the next level then would be to get the target vowel. The closest vowel we'll say is ah. It's a little bit closer to a than is. So we'll go with ah. That'll be our new target vowel. And now we start our shell. And they're already saying tut, so we know that they can say the T sound on both sides. So now we go from tut to tot, and then from tot to tat. So not a very hard progression. And then from tat to cat. Now, how do we know sort of what we're doing as far as the consonants go? Well, this is a schematic sort of a side view of your tongue. And I just made it up. It's not supposed to really look like a tongue. But this is the front of your mouth. Here are the sounds made by your lips. Here are the sounds made in the back of your mouth, kind of around your soft palate. This is made in the middle of your mouth. And then these are right behind your front teeth, and then kind of somewhere in that front, behind your front teeth area, what we call alveolar sounds. And there's no information about this being on the left side and this being on the right side if you're looking at it from the top down. I just didn't have enough room to put everything all together in a nice, neat little circle. So they're kind of all in that same area, but it's not. I don't want you to think that you make the T and the D sound on the left side of your mouth with your tongue on the left, and the S and Z with your tongue on the right. That would not be correct. Okay, so if we've got these three examples at the top, the child says fis for fish, and oos for juice, and I for chip. We've written what the child says phonetically and what they would need to say. We've written that in phonetics. So the first thing you would do is write this down, what they say now, what you want them to say, and then you would decide what do you need to sort of put in the word to make it sound correct. So first question, are the vowels correct in these words? Do the vowels match up from, so we have an I here, and an I here, an oo, and an oo, and an I, and an I. So the vowels are okay. Which one of those words do you think you would work on first? The child loves goldfish crackers, the child loves juice, and the child loves chips. Which one do you think you'd be able to really get in shape first? Well, let me ask you this. Which one is almost right? Fis. The listener could reinforce that easily. And it's not a very far trip from the S to the SH. So S and then would be in this area, SH would be a little bit in that area. Not very far, shouldn't be very difficult to fix. But what about juice and chip? If you wanted to work on juice, and this sound right here, the D with the J sound, that when you say it fast sounds like J, that's the J sound, and this is the Ch sound, the CH. Those are kind of, the child is leaving that out of juice. There's no J sound in juice. So try as you might, you've done some echoic trials and they just can't say that J sound. What would you select as the next easiest consonant? Well, there's no right answer, but one that I would sure test is just the D sound, because it's the first part of the J sound. Can he say deuce? If he can't say deuce, a voiced plosive, can he say toos, an unvoiced plosive? At least the tongue's in the right spot. And then we won't have to move it around. If he can say toos, but not deuce, then that would be my target. If he can say deuce, that would be my target. And then you'd move from there. Same for chip. Can he say tip? If he can't say tip, and he can't say dip, and he can't say sip, can he say bip or pip? It's not the best, it's not my favorite choice, but that might be what you're left with, and then you can move it back. So again, you can see the great advantage in being able to analyze these. Here's an example with dog. The child says, for dog. Is the vowel correct? No. So you shape the into ah, and you look at your vowel neighborhood and you see how close are they. And let's see whether I guess I don't have a vowel neighborhood up here. I think I won't go back to that. And now we have the correct vowel. We've got the aw for dog, and then we start to work with the consonants. So we get the vowel in place, we add consonants. So now we have aw, awk, we get some placeholder in there, awk. If he can say og, great. If he can't, then we go for the unvoiced, the K sound. And then the next step, we're working from bottom up, we start to fill in what's missing. We add a placeholder for that first D sound. And he can't say D, he's having trouble with that, so we get the B sound in there because it's the same manner of sound. It's one of those plosive sounds, one of those exploding sounds. So we get bok. And now we're very, very close. We've got placeholders in every place for all three phonemes. And then we shape the D from that B, we get dock. And then we shape the unvoiced K to the voiced G, which is not a very far step. And so we have three phonemes, the D phoneme, the aw phoneme, and the G phoneme, and there's your progression. Okay, let's talk about errors. This was a big request in the morning session, and so these are some things that I see people doing when they're working with kids that I think are probably things that if they're in your repertoire, you probably would like to look for some alternatives or drop them out altogether. One of the first ones is disconnecting the components of the phrase. I want cookie. Say I, good. Say want, good. Say cookie, good for you. If they can't repeat at that 3-syllable, or in this case 4-syllable level, at whatever the phrase syllable number is, then that should be a tip-off that it's too hard. And so use your phrase lists that you have and check a few other 4-syllable phrases. Maybe there's something about I want cookie that makes it difficult. But can they say want cookie? Can they say I want go? Can they say some 3-syllable phrases that start with I want? And begin to judge whether the problem is with the phonemes or whether the problem is with the syllables. If you're finding yourself slowing down and beginning to disconnect the phrase is too long. It's got too many syllables in it. So fix that. The reason to do that is because phrasing is the unit that gets reinforced. So and we don't say it the same way as we do if we disconnect it. So if we say I, and then we say want, and then we say cookie, we release that T sound so it sounds like want. But if we say I want cookie, we don't release the T sound, and it sounds a little bit more like an NG sound, almost. And the reason it sounds a little bit more like that, and that's not exactly how most of us would write it, but for our purposes here, I didn't want to get into a lot of other phonetic transcription. But this is close enough. The reason it kind of begins to sound like that is because of that sound right there. The tongue has too far to go to say want. The T has to release in the front and then move all the way to the back for the K sound. It slows us down. And in connected speech, we don't like to be slowed down because the reinforcer is available at the end of the utterance, not piece by piece throughout the utterance. And so you want to make sure that you're looking at phrasing and teaching phrasing that you want. Another error that I see is the echoic model is too high or it's at an unnatural pitch. And I hear teachers speaking at a perfectly normal pitch, and then they'll give the model at a completely unnormal, atypical pitch level. So it might sound like this. Say, cookie. Say, taco. Say, I want to go. And so we get the squeakers and not the speakers. And so it's a common problem. And what I would suggest you do is listen to yourself on a video. Nobody else has to listen to it. Flip cam a little video and see whether or not you're presenting an unnatural pitch model. We often hear overemphasizing on the precision of consonants. So say dog. Say ma. And that sort of goes along with the unnatural separations of sounds. Say baloo. Say gareen. Say air. Air. Again, hopefully from the things that we've talked about before, you can see that there's no benefit in separating words like this because the listener won't be able to reinforce that kind of an auditory signal or that kind of a response from the child. It distorts the signal too much, and it's really difficult to get rid of once they kind of get locked in, especially things like that sound at the end of words. Say dog. And that's why we get things like gareen and baloo and so on and so forth. Rather, what you want to teach is it would be better that they say doc with a K sound than that they say dogga, because that sends an auditory signal to or stimulus to the listener that will throw them off. Whereas if they say doc, the listener will likely be able to respond to that. Now, I'm not talking about sophisticated speakers. There definitely is a difference between saying dog and saying duck, and you can all hear it. But if you're not a sophisticated speaker, if you're a fledgling speaker, an early learner, early speaker, then it really doesn't matter whether you voice or don't voice on some of those particular sounds. I hear people repeat phonemes and then they reinforce a non-functional segment. And we hear that also. A non-functional segment often happens with say ku, good, say ki, good, say cookie. So, so watch that as well. A common one that I hear is say candy, say ka, 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 candy. And so the child will then say ka, 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 candy. And if that gets reinforced, we should not be surprised when the child goes home and asks for ka, 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 candy. And then somebody says, no, no, say candy. Well, that's never been reinforced before, but ka, 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 candy has been. So be very, very cautious and aware of what you're asking kids to say. Echoic drill without a plan for manned application. I often get that question, well, how much echoic drill should we do? And my answer to that is, how much man training are you planning on doing? Because the echoic drill without a place to go is really suspect. Echoic drill is there for a purpose, echoic practice. If you don't have, if you want to say to yourself, where are we going with this skill? Just like touch your nose, or touch the picture of the banana or the car, or clap your hands. Where are you going with that skill? What functional skill would be the next step up from touch your nose? It's not really enough to call it a filler. And so, well, wipe your nose, or blow your nose, or scratch your nose, or wash your nose. But just touch your nose as a filler to sort of get them back on track and responding, I would suggest to you is one that you want to take a look at. The same for echoic practice. If all you're doing is echoic practice in the absence of manned training, heavy manned training related to those echoic skills, then you want to take a look at why are we doing this. Because if there's no manned application, then there's not really any function for the child. There's benefit for you that they respond echoically, but there wouldn't be benefit necessarily for them if that's not specifically programmed in, like remembering practice and so on. It is often a problem when we have multiple speech teachers. It's sort of the good news and the bad news. It's nice to have a lot of different people available to work with a child, but as soon as we have more than one person, we have different people that are presenting the models differently. They're reinforcing possibly differently. We've got now a team of people that have to be up to speed on what the child's targets are and what they know how to do and what they could do this morning that's different from what they can do this afternoon. So at the very least, I like to use those echoic to manned cards that you can send with the child for the afternoon teacher or the next person that's going to be doing some speech training with them. In some way, you want to find some system that works so that it cuts down on your meeting time, it takes some of the burden off you, but still you can communicate the information. In one classroom that I worked in that had 3 parapros and a teacher, with, I don't know, 6 or 7 kids, they had a big whiteboard, and they had every child's name there with some of the current speech targets. And then when I, paraprofessional A, finished working with a child, I would go up and modify the target so that when you, paraprofessional B, comes in to work with a child, you can easily see, oh, I see where we're at now. So you need some sort of a system to track that. Another problem I see is setting specific echoic targets too early. So if you have a child that is at that level 1 or level 2 on the SAS card, barely vocalizing, not really very good with echoics, and just beginning to sort of practice using their voice, it's, I think, premature to ask them to meet specific echoic targets. Now, I'm talking at that very early level. I want a lot of raw material to deal with. And so what we do is sometimes set a range of echoics. And I might give folks a list of 20 or 30 different sounds, and we write them on the wall or wherever it's easy for them to reference it. And they run through that list, and they just click when the child happens to get it right. So say wa, say wah, say be, say oo, say la, say wa, say we, say mama, say mommy, and we just, whatever is on the list, and we count up. And so we know I went through 20 on the list, and they got 12 of the 20. I don't even care which 12 they are at this level. So I'm only trying to increase the number of varied sounds that they at least are in the ballpark with. And for echoically, we would want that ballpark to be almost on the money. And sometimes at the very, very early levels, we just toggle among 3 vowels or 4 or 5 vowels. Say ah, say oo, e, ah, ow, o, and so on and so forth. And then we just kind of count how many times did they echo within very, very close to point-to-point correspondence. And that's what I mean by a range of targets. Okay, well, I would like to take you through, you guys have made it through Speech 101, Speech 201, Speech 301. I really think you're ready for beyond Speech 301. I would like to kind of put the frosting on the cake with just a couple of points about co-articulation, if I could. And I think we'll still have time for a few questions. So let me just draw your attention to what's going on here with why my pitch for writing things phonetically, so that you can pay attention to what you're asking the child to say. So for the word water, you can see that the vocal cords are on for 3 of the 4 sounds that they say. And the vocal cords are not turned on for the T sound. That's a voiceless sound. But we don't say water, we say water. And so why do we do that? Why do we change this? Why don't we precise, unless we live in Great Britain, where everything sounds very precise, we might say water. But why don't Americans do that? American English, well, we like to talk fast, and we don't want to have to expend any more energy with talking fast than we absolutely have to, or else we won't be able to say as many things. And so what happens is we voice that T sound and turn it into a D, because now the vocal cords don't have to go through all the gyrations of on, off, on. They can just stay on the whole time. And that's why we end up saying water and butter instead of butter, and so on and so forth. So be very careful when you're setting your targets, because if you're teaching a child to say water, for example, you don't want him to only ever just say water. If you did, if that was your end goal, that's the only thing he's ever going to have to say water in, is a single 2-syllable word, water. Then you can teach him to say water. But if you want him to say water, please, or I want water, or where's the water, let's go play in the water, water in any kind of a connected phrase, then this is what you want to have happen. You want fluency with the system. And so think about that, and I would accept water. And that would be the auditory model that I would give as well. I think we'll take a look at this one. So let's say we want the child to say ice cream. It's important to know what kinds of components the child would have to learn. Remember on that set skill for T, where it was T-ta-tu and ta-ta-T-T-tu-tu and all of those different combinations. This is a sort of a real-life example of why you would do that. If you write it phonetically, then the child has to be able to say any combination, draw a circle around any combination of phonetic symbols here, and the child has to be able to emit that response. So they've got to be able to say I, and I wa, and I won. They've got to be able to say tice. If they can't say tice, they're not going to be able to say I want ice cream, although it would actually come out more like dice. They've got to be able to say any combination, eam, lees, eep, plea. They've got to be able to say scream with the P on the end, and so on. They've got to be able to say any combination at all. Well, let's take a look at Mommy and Daddy and Mommy and Katie. We have an ND in both in the top and an NK in the bottom. Mommy and Daddy has an ND together. The vocal cords are on for the N and they're on for the D. The vocal cord is on in Mommy and Katie only for the N. It's active for the N, and then you turn your vocal cords off. Otherwise, it sounds like Mommy and Gatey. And so to make it sound like Mommy and Katie, the vocal cords have to go off. Well, let's take a look at what happens with co-articulation. That is, when one sound is next to another, is said right next to another one. Well, the N and the D are both front sounds. However, the N and the K, one is in the front, so I got to move my tongue up behind my teeth to go N, and then I've quickly got to move my tongue to the back to say the K sound. So that's, we already know that that's going to be a burden in terms of cost efficiency. It's going to slow us down. So what do we do? Well, if you look at this schematic as this rectangle here is the back of the tongue and the front of the tongue, the N and the D for Mommy and Daddy are both in the front by the tongue, kind of up by where the teeth are, right behind the front teeth. But the K is way at the back. It's made way at the back of your mouth at your soft palate level. So that's a far distance. So what we do is we modify where our tongue is. And so instead of saying Mommy and Katie, we say Mommy and Katie. It comes out like an NG instead of the N. That's the same reason that we say thank you instead of thank you. And the same reason that we say ink instead of ink. Because it's easier, it's faster. That's why we say education instead of education. And that's called co-articulation. And it's critical to keep this in mind when you're teaching phrasing and syllable phrasing, and why you don't want to reinforce component parts without some knowledge of what you're going to put that component part into at some point. Tongue placement to produce any sound is affected by the requirements of the adjacent sounds, the adjacent phoneme positions, the adjacent tongue positions. So where it is you put your tongue for any particular sound depends on what you want it to do next. And I know that sounds mentalistic, and we won't go down that road right now. But luckily, our body doesn't have to worry about that. It sort of figures it out when we have good echoic repertoires. So for Mike's cat may not stay, we've got, my circles are in a little bit the wrong place, but we've got the S embedded in two Ks at the beginning of that for Mike's cat. And then we've got the S occurring between two T's at the end of it for not stay. So what happens to the S there? Well, we've got the S. These are the positions for, we make the S up in the front, we make the T up in the front, we make the K in the back. So we're okay there for not stay. We know our tongue is pretty much going to stay in the same spot. But where is our tongue going to go from the K in Mike to the S in Mikes and back to the K in cat? What is that S going to do? Are we really going to leave our tongue back here and move it all the way up here and all the way back here again to make those sounds? Probably not. So if we were to ask you to say Mike's cat, and we videoed the side of your face and we could see where your tongue was going, chances are that that S placement would be right back farther than from where it is when you're saying not stay. So when you're coming up with phrases from your phrase list, resist the urge to tell the child where to put his tongue. You can show them some tongue placement if you need to, but that's not how we all learn to talk. And I often cover my face and just work on the auditory signal. And the reason is because they have to focus on the auditory signal. And I like not to get too technical with tongue placement with people that are just learning to talk, because that's not really how we all learned it. And I think if they learn to listen, the tongue will automatically go where it needs to go. But keep in mind what the functional phrase is, what the context is, and I think you'll be fine. So just a quick summary. If you've already got consistent echoic responses, then you're just ready to go ahead and do man training and kind of clean up the speech a little bit. You've got this slide, so I don't think that I'll belabor that point. But if you don't have very much speech, you've got low frequency occurring, not very much variability, the echoics aren't very good, or there's no echoics, you say whatever, and they say nothing. Those pretty much are the children that I tend to work with. Then you need to, I think, look at three things in setting up your program. Number one, if there is no echoics, then there's not going to be any vocal speech anytime soon. So that means that there has to be some other communication system. And again, an echoic is an imitation. It's a special kind of imitation. Sign language is an imitation, an imitative skill. And so is picking up a picture and handing it to a teacher in the case of PECs. How do you learn to pick up a picture and hand it to somebody? You do what they did. At least that's how we prompt it. So for an alternative communication system, while you're developing the echoic, you need something. And I say go with whatever communication system meets as many of the big 5 criteria as possible. And that would be it's fast, it's easy, it's cheap, it's always with you, it's accessible, and other people can understand it. So fast, easy, cheap, accessible, or it's always with you, it's easy to keep it with you, and other people can understand it. Now, if you're considering sign language or you're considering a picture selection system, you probably won't get all 5 of those. But whichever one for that child meets as many of those big 5 criteria as possible, that's the one I would select as the alternative system for now. And then put your eggs in the basket of developing the motivation for people and for things, so that you've got a child that wants to, or an adult, whoever you're working with, to learn to talk, somebody that wants to hang out with you, where they see you as a reinforcing stimulus, a reinforcing person, and not somebody that's going to correct them all the time. Once they've got skills, then correction is not so much of an issue. But kids get turned off really, really fast, and so would you if somebody was always telling you that you weren't doing it well enough, that it wasn't quite right. And so for fledgling speakers, early learners of speech, it can't be not quite right. It's got to be, that's pretty cool that you can make that sound. and I will help you make some other sounds. So work on developing those strong preferences. A lot of keeping the bar low and a lot of fun vocal kinds of games. And then through that context, you can actually increase the vocals, both informally in some of the ways that we talked about before and formally if you need to. And with that, I thank you for your time. I know it's late, but we do have a little bit of time. If you have any questions, we can either take them as a group or you can come up and talk with me afterwards. But thank you so much.
Are there any questions that you'd like to ask this group before we give you the code? Well, I want to thank you so much for that great information. Very helpful. I would give you the code phonetically, but the middle sound would have 2 symbols to it. So it is this, B-A-T, BAT 886, BAT 886. Thank you very much and have a great evening.